Is this the year Joshua Manning breaks out at receiver? Let's talk about him and more pivotal players right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And coming up later in the week, of course, some possibly huge news for Missouri basketball as Jason Crowe Jr. is set to make his college decision here on Friday, 4:30 Central Time. That's going to be streamed on CBS Sports HQ, and well, I'll talk a little bit more about that young man here as the weekend program goes along here, but also some more interesting basketball news as Kansas State and Missouri are playing a couple of exhibition basketball games. What's up with that? Going to talk about that in an argument for Gary Pinkel over Nick Saban. Not really, but some Gary Pinkel appreciation coming up here on the program. Also, first, really quickly, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by a FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. But you know what? I was just thinking about the most pivotal players on Mizzou football this year. And obviously, you think about the quarterback position anytime you have a new starter. So Bo Prabula or Sam Horn, whoever it might be, well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? I also think that left tackle is almost too obvious as well. Johnny Williams or Jalen Early or Javen Richardson, one of those three J players, is likely to be your starter there at left tackle. We'll find out here in about, well, probably the next 3 or 4 weeks or so, I would say. But when I think about players who, if they hit anything close to what I and the staff, certainly more importantly, the Missouri coaching staff believes about these guys and their ceiling, how good they can be as players, well, the first guy who comes to mind is former Lee Summit native Joshua Manning. I think at wide receiver, he's a guy, if he's good, to me, and by good, I mean a guy who's obviously a guy who can get open in the SEC, maybe do a Theo Weiss, at least impersonation out there on the field. I think if he's a good player, the rest of that wide receiver room is really going to come together. And considering Missouri's losing Luther Burden III, they're losing Theo Weiss as well. I think Weiss was an excellent, underrated player in the SEC. We all know what kind of player Burden was. I just think that Missouri has a pretty good Burden replacement and a proven SEC commodity in Kevin Coleman. I think I know what I have in him in the slot, and I think I know what I have in Marquise Johnson as well, a guy who maybe could have had his breakout season last season if maybe he didn't already have it in 2023, to be quite honest. He made some huge plays in an incredibly memorable season for Missouri that year. So to me, a guy who's at the very least in Johnson, a great speed threat on the outside, and I think showed more than that in the bowl game, the Music City Bowl at the end of the season. Again, I got two guys I'm pretty confident in based on what I've seen so far. I think Manning really makes three, to be quite obvious. He makes three excellent starters. I mean, I think Missouri's receivers were among the strength of its team last season. I think that'll be the case again this year and will help out whoever is the starting quarterback to make an obvious statement. And, you know, I think I talked last season, I did a similar topic to this in the offseason. I could probably run back the tape from last season talking about Missouri tight end Brett Norfleet. Again, as I said last season, but worth it for reminding all of you, even who are everydayers, who probably don't remember every single word I've said from 360 days ago. I do think Norfleet could very much be the key to unlocking the intermediate part of the Missouri passing game under Eli Drinkwitz and Kirby Moore in particular, because I think for the last couple seasons, especially in the Brady Cook era, Missouri has very much been a dink and chunk type of operation where you see a lot of passes near the line of scrimmage, a lot of screen passes to Burden, for example, but then occasionally mixing in those deep balls to Burden and Weiss and Marquise Johnson down the field. That's something Missouri did very effectively in 2023. I think less so in 2024. I was really looking for Norfleet to, again, help unlock the middle part of the field, say about 10 to 15 yards down the field, particularly in the middle part of the field for Missouri. Obviously, that's a more dangerous, I shouldn't say obviously, but that is a more dangerous part to throw the football sometimes in terms of interceptions. Linebackers can be lurking around there, and occasionally quarterbacks won't see them. But it's also a place where you can get big chunks of yardages and first downs while not throwing the ball all the way across to the boundary of the field. It's an easier throw in a lot of ways, if not at sometimes tighter windows against zone coverage. So a little bit counterintuitive there. But again, if you want to attack the entire part of the field, which I think every offensive coordinator would ideally like to do, I think Manning could be a part of it. I think Brett Norfleet can obviously be a part of it as well. And maybe he would have been last year to a bigger extent if he didn't have that early shoulder injury in week 1. And when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, well, typically I'm going to take your defensive line and your edge rushers over just about anybody in terms of importance. Just all things being equal, yeah, give me a pass rusher. Then maybe give me an interior defensive lineman as well. But then it's probably cornerbacks for me. And to that point, I'm feeling very confident about Missouri's defensive line and really just the front seven in general right now. So if I'm correct on those assumptions, then really the outside, the cornerbacks for Missouri, I think are going to be of paramount importance. And Toriano Pride having another season of experience, hopefully in the Missouri system with Corey Batoon and the rest of the staff. And, of course, Drayden Norwood back for another season with the Tigers. Newcomer Stephen Hall as well, a transfer from Washington State, hopefully. Again, I don't know which one of those three guys I would say is the most pivotal or most important. I would just say they're all really important. It would be huge if one of those guys can emerge as a true shutdown type of player, at least a guy, if not a shut, that phrase is probably overused, especially in the modern game. I mean, who really truly shuts down the great wide receivers in this sport? That's a very short list is the point. So at least a person that can be extremely competitive against most of your number one wide receivers in the SEC, well, that's going to go a long way to what I think is solidifying what looks like a really deep and interesting Missouri defense. That really corner is about my only question mark on it at the moment. You know what? Let's slide across the western border of the state and talk about the KU game and why I'm feeling quite a bit better about the Jayhawks. Well, not about the Jayhawks, but you know what I'm saying about the Missouri and Kansas football game. Talk about that because, well, not only am I feeling better about it, but I'm feeling better about my prognostication abilities as well, because over at FanDuel Sportsbook, I did a pretty good job of predicting the Missouri-Kansas line. I said it was going to be Missouri by 7, perhaps even 6.5, just depending on, well, if you wanted to go the full touchdown or not. It sounds like, well, my buddies over at FanDuel Sportsbook have said 6.5. Missouri favored by the Jayhawks, over the Jayhawks, I should say, right now. Also, Missouri a 6.5-point underdog at Oklahoma as we speak. So those are the two games available over at FanDuel Sportsbook. But, of course, they've got plenty to bet on other than just football at this point. Baseball in full swing, golf, the Open Championship coming up. Don't bet on Tommy Fleetwood, people. It's not going to happen. There's already articles about, well, he's the guy who has made $30 million and has never won a tournament. One of the all-time jinxes. There's no way he's going to win. You heard it here first. But regardless of what you're into, you got to be into it over at FanDuel. There's no doubt about that because new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So since Missouri and Kansas have not played football in 14 years, believe it or not, well, some of you may not remember a time when this game would truly often make or break Missouri's entire season, especially, well, decades ago when Kansas was at least somewhat competitive. That wasn't a brutally long period of time, but regardless, we are back because a loss here this season to Kansas in week 2, well, that would absolutely wreck Missouri's season. I'm going to be completely honest with you. And I don't want to sound overly dramatic here or overly repetitive for those of you who are everydayers because I know I've made this point before, but it is what it is. Now, the good news is I'm feeling better about this game, and I'll tell you why, even though, well, it's maybe a half point lower than I would have predicted a few weeks ago. Again, Missouri a 6.5 point favorite as we speak here today over the Jayhawks. As good as I think Jalen Daniels is, the Kansas quarterback, and I do think he's a good college quarterback at the very least, I don't love Kansas's receivers or just their collection of skill players in general. I think they have a solid pair of running backs, a solid physical running game, perhaps. It just seems to me the more I look at Kansas on paper and how they performed with Daniels the last couple years, it sure seems like he's going to have to make a lot of things happen once again against Missouri's defense in particular. Again, a defense that I think is going to be a really good unit. So that's my main takeaway. So for as many question marks, really unknowns as much as question marks, new faces as much as unknowns that there is on the Missouri roster offensively, if the Mizzou offense is able to put up, let's say 21, 24 points against the Jayhawks, I think Missouri should really be in decent shape there. I don't see this game turning into an enormous shootout. Now, I could be wrong on the over-unders. It's certainly happened before, though. I'm hitting probably 65% of them. I will take that. But regardless, another reason I'm feeling good about this game, not just the matchup there, Missouri's defense against Kansas's offense, I also like the spot for Missouri. Not only are the Tigers, well, they're going to have some extra time. Once again, the Tigers have moved their week 1 game up a couple days from Saturday to Thursday before Labor Day weekend. That obviously gives the Tigers a couple more days of rest, a couple more days to prepare. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I also just like the spot for Missouri, a game where, well, Central Arkansas, not exactly an opponent you're worried about a letdown heading into the Kansas game. On the other hand, well, Kansas has a much different opponent. They're playing Fresno State at home where, again, over at FanDuel Sportsbook, Kansas a 13.5 point favorite at home against Fresno State. So obviously the odds are Kansas is going to take care of business there. You do have to wonder if you're a Jayhawk fan, week 1, could your team be looking ahead toward Missouri? At least if I'm Lance Leopold, if I'm the Kansas coach, that's definitely what I'm asking myself. So I think this is a good spot for Missouri on multiple different levels too, and I just think Missouri's the better team. So if I think 7 was the number, if I thought Missouri should at least be a full touchdown and an extra point favorite, well, 6.5 isn't the worst odds in the world, though let's be patient and see if we can get even more value as as a kickoff approaches here in, well, gosh, if it's 43 days plus to Central Arkansas, I guess it's another 9 there. So about 52 days until the Missouri-Kansas rivalry returns. And switching gears to basketball here for a bit, as in what is becoming a growing trend here across college basketball. Well, Missouri is playing some exhibition games against a high major opponent and a local, at least relatively local high major opponent in Kansas State. Missouri and Kansas State reportedly playing 2 exhibition games, one in Columbia this coming season and one in Manhattan the following season. This will just be right before the actual start of each team's regular season for the next couple years. So the obvious question here is, okay, Missouri and Kansas State playing basketball. This has certainly happened before, not only in the Big 8 and the Big 12, but even in the in the Missouri moving to the SEC era. Well, so why an exhibition game and not a regular season game? Well, it's quite simple, honestly. It's called having your cake and eating it too, because now these teams and coaches can contest themselves against high major competition and get an idea of where their teams actually stand in the pecking order without actually taking any real risk of hurting your NCAA tournament resume. So while this trend does seem very anathema to the spirit of competition in a lot of ways, I suppose I understand it, and at least it's better than the secret scrimmages, that type of deal. And hey, as a season ticket holder, if I'm going to say, well, I'd like to see some more interesting basketball, maybe these exhibition games aren't the worst thing in the world. I just have to say, as a traditional college basketball fan, I'm having a tough time wrapping my mind around Missouri playing a high major team in an exhibition game. The only time I can ever remember this happening was Missouri and Kansas coming together before the Michael Porter Jr. season. That was to benefit flood relief, I believe, the Houston flood situation all those years ago. So that was obviously a game that did very well, sold a ton of tickets in Kansas City, generated a lot of interest. So that's all well and good. I just wonder, will it be the same for Kansas State? Is that going to be a sellout at Mizzou Arena and Bramlage Coliseum, all that good stuff? Or are people going to be turned off by the exhibition nature of it? What exactly is it going to look like? How many minutes are the starters going to play? I just think this is interesting. I'll say that. I suppose there are some examples out there in college basketball already, but again, just as somebody is used to seeing Missouri not even really play exhibition games in more recent years, but in the past play exhibition games against somebody like Marathon Oil, while playing Kansas State, I'm just having a tough time wrapping my mind around that. And in an effort to rank the 20 greatest college football coaches of the past 20 years, well, would you believe that ESPN's Bill Conley actually has Gary Pinkel ranked ahead of Nick Saban? Well, at least on one metric, and at least this is going to explain how incredible the Gary Pinkel record and run truly was. Put it in some more context. And I'll answer a couple of your listener questions coming up right after this. So if one is going to attempt to rank the greatest coaches of the past 20 seasons, or indeed of all time, whatever you want to do, the easiest thing in the world would be to just say, well, who has the most wins? Who has the most national championships? And just go, well, rank them 1 through 10 and call it a day. But, of course, that isn't quite the best way of looking at it because, of course, different schools have different challenges. And while obviously the blue blood type of programs like Ohio State, just ask Ryan Day, hey, they have their own challenges. Well, they have a heck of a lot of advantages just in terms of money, dollars and cents, and all that kind of good stuff. So, again, Bill Conley, an ESPN guy and a Mizzou guy at that, well, he had an article recently, ESPN.com, and boy, I apologize. I should warn the viewing audience before putting Paul Feinbaum's face on the screen that quickly. But again, let's move through it here. Ranking the best college football coaches over the past 20 years here. Well, basically I'll summarize this for you rather quickly. We're talking first here about measuring performance versus expectation. So in other words, hey, we're going to factor in that Missouri, especially when Gary Pinkel took over in 2001, was not exactly the same as Nick Saban taking over Alabama. Let's face it. And obviously Saban, well, took Alabama to new heights, and we'll get to all that for a minute. But again, I'll just scroll down here and show you the best performance versus your historical baseline, again, of the past 20 years. Well, Chris Peterson at Boise State and also the University of Washington as well is here at number 1. Number 2, Art Briles, Houston and Baylor. Number 3, none other than, yes, Gary Pinkel. Let's just zoom in on that. Right above Nick Saban, ladies and gentlemen. And before, if you're an Alabama fan who happens to be watching here, maybe you like the Tide and the Tigers, well, I'll tell you this, considering the historical baselines, again, of the 3 teams, of the multiple teams ahead of them here, Missouri, Houston, Baylor, Boise State, and Washington, a program that admittedly has won a national championship at some point here, at least in the very, very early 90s, late 80s, right? I think it was 1990, if I'm remembering correctly. But regardless, that actually tells you how good Nick Saban is, so nobody freak out too much here. Again, the rest of this list, we're talking Army's head coach, Jeff Monken, Georgia Southern, Tulane, Houston. Oh, Lance Leopold at, again, the horrifically bad Kansas run, coming off of that, and at Buffalo, not exactly a national power. Again, the fact that Nick Saban is way up there just tells you what he did historically. So, again, Bill Conley goes on here to say, okay, well, let's combine as best we can here, give 60% weight here to, how did you do above your historical average, but also just go straight performance as well. Well, it turns out Nick Saban, number 1 in that scenario. So that means you're probably doing something right if Nick Saban turns out to be number 1 in your metric. And guess who is still in the top 5? Yes, none other than our Gary Pinkel, sandwiched right between Kirby Smart and Urban Meyer, of all people, also ahead of Jim Harbaugh, and very excitingly, to me personally, ahead of Bob Stoops as well. How about that for some bulletin board material, Bob? Take that and stick it right on your forehead as far as I'm concerned. So really the point here obviously was to have a little bit of fun, but number 1. But number 2, also to just put the greatness, the run of Gary Pinkel into context once again. Because again, even it's not just, well, only because Missouri sucked from 1983 until 1996, essentially, and then we were pretty horrific in 99 and 2000 as well. Hey, we'll factor that in. But also, Gary Pinkel just had some amazing seasons, including a couple Final Four de factos, as I've talked about here, in 07 and 13. Some teams that were legit top 10 type of performing teams. Hey, again, tip of the hat to Gary Pinkel. And you know what? A tip of the cap to all of you for listening to this program today. And you know what? I'll get to, thankfully I didn't tease any specific listener questions. I'll get to those here in the coming days. I promise you that. And also, well, Also, I've got to get to Brian Smith still as well. Didn't get to him today because, quite simply, I think he's in Atlanta. I think he's in SEC Media Days. Reached out to Brian. He'll get back to me soon enough. He's always game for some recruiting talk. Can't wait to get to the Scout Master as usual. And by the way, check out his show, The Portal, on YouTube and wherever you get audio podcasts. So, until tomorrow, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.